Hi everyone, my name is Emily and I'm a youth services librarian at the Rock Island Public Library, and today I have two books for you. I'm pre-recording this because I'm working the election today, and so this is kind of bridging the gap between Women's History Month and National Poetry Month. And so this first book is Kusama. And this book is by an Italian artist, Elisa Macellari. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And it's the story of artist Yayoi Kusama. And she came to the United States in 1957. And throughout the 60s and 70s, she created a lot of famous art and knew various artists herself. Like in this book, she writes a letter as a young woman to Georgia O'Keeffe, who writes back to her and says, "But your watercolors have flown to the country when the art world is in town. I could show your work to a gallerist or two. What do you think? Now and again, I go to New York on business. Let me know, Yayoi. I would be delighted to receive more of your news." So I like something, there's many things to enjoy about this book, but something I noticed in the early pages is the fact that, okay, so when we're kind of learning about Yayoi herself and her family, like you see the pages reflecting that. And like her major color schemes, for example, the color red, you see kind of the contrast between her standing in this ocean of movement versus Georgia O'Keeffe, and she has a completely different color palette. Like this is a different person, a different artist, and she's at a different time in her life when she first interacts with this younger artist. So throughout the book, we get not just Yayoi's sort of like what's going on in her life, but also like what she was feeling and kind of what she was experiencing psychologically, but also as an artist and starting to exhibit and sort of figuring out, okay, what kind of career she wanted to have. Because in the introduction, the writer and artist of this book writes about the fact that she's had this long art career. And she moved back to Japan in 1973 and sort of there was like a 20-year period where people didn't remember who she was. But in part because of her experiences, like her ups and downs within the art world and then getting farther away, going back to Japan. Macellari writes that as a figure, Kusama draws on both Eastern and Western cultures. While she experienced the contemporary in American society, she maintains a solid core that is rooted in the Japanese tradition. This mixture has the capacity to speak a new language, uncovering new forms of expression that enable us to glimpse a world without barriers. And gets into the fact that, okay, this was somebody who was able to kind of resist the pull of trends and has just done her own unique thing for a really long time. And there's moments where you see like the way she fits into the art world. For example, like here's Andy Warhol, like stealing some of her models. And she's like, "You always do this. Stop taking my models all the time." But throughout her life, as her style, as her body of work like changed and grew, the world changed too. And so like near the end of this book, 12 years after her return, Japan finally seems ready to embrace her art. Like this is somebody who, when she was young, when her art was sort of publicized and written about in Japan, Yayoi's mother said to Yayoi's father, "Come on, your daughter is a national disgrace. I know you still send her money now and again, and look what she does." And the whole idea from her mom's perspective is you have to go out and buy all these newspapers and burn them so nobody knows what our daughter is doing. And now, she's one of the most famous artists in the world. So even though it wasn't necessarily like an easy or straightforward journey, there's very few artistic journeys that are. This is somebody who was really kind of defying social norms and using art to draw attention to things like the Vietnam War. And so she was forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about gender and sexuality, but also this idea of, well, hang on, seeing people in public doing these kind of art demonstrations or these displays that were orchestrated by Yayoi, okay, people found that offensive, but then people dying in Vietnam, somehow like that violence was normalized. So this wasn't just kind of a commentary on American society, but also what we see in the world and what we choose to be offended by. So if you're interested, I really like this book. I really like the art. and it was interesting to learn more about an artist whose work I know a little bit. Like, certainly I guess I'm familiar with some of her more famous like installations, but to learn about her life and kind of just her ups and downs, her history, it's really interesting. So if you like art, if you like biographies, graphic biographies, which I've been really into lately, check this out. And our next book, which I should say neither of these books are available through our apps. So that is part of the reason I chose these two together, because you will have to check out the physical books from the library if you want to read them. And the second one is Star Child. And this book by Ibi Zoboi is, it's a lot of poetry, and it is about Octavia Estelle Butler. And so you get into her life, and you get a lot of nonfiction facts about this person, and you get like prose parts where you sort of get an explanation from the author about, okay, you know, this was what was going on in the world at this time in Octavia Butler's life as she was growing up. This was the history that she grew up alongside, but also things that happened in her life and sort of affected her sensibilities or the things that she would write about. Like when she was very young, she saw her grandmother's house burn down, and it was this house that her uncles had built, and there were a lot of things in there that could not be replaced. And so for the author, I mean, this was this image that haunted her, this sight of the burning house. In various novels, she would kind of explore fire and its effect, or, you know, after a fire, what is left, what will happen, and what will come of the ashes, sort of. And so you get like actual writings by Octavia Butler and sort of like images that give you kind of a glimpse into her process. So just like a list of her inspirations, her mother and her grandmother. And also pretty early on, you get to see like the notebook that she wrote in. She had this notebook for years as a child, and this pink notebook was where she would write. And because of when she grew up, like Octavia Butler was part of the baby boom, and so she was growing up at this time. I mean, her family was deeply religious, but she was living at this moment where, okay, well, she read the Bible and enjoyed the stories there, but she was also, at the time she was young, hearing about the space race and thinking, wow, you know, there's so much out there. There's so much that's, I mean, for most of human history, kind of been beyond our comprehension. But now there's this idea that, well, hang on, things that used to just be science fiction are becoming a reality. And what does that mean for people? How is that going to change life for people back on Earth? Will it change life for people? And so the book goes on to explore the fact that part of her journey as an author came, I mean, from imagining things, like from growing up making up stories from the time I think she was about 4 years old. And then she talks about the fact that by the time she was 10, she was writing them down, and then she started submitting them for publication. And that was what made her think, oh, okay, I'm getting rejection slips, but this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to keep doing for a living. And I mean, she graduated high school in 1965, so she is somebody who was beginning to create. And I guess in this poem, you get this sense of, okay, it's not just this moment in her life. Obviously, there were big world events happening in 1965. In the late 1960s in general, many things were going on. And so the poem here is, she told us to watch the stars, how they wink from afar as if holding secrets within their luminescent bodies. And we listened to her words on the page in her books like secret codes, for us writers, us stargazers, tracing the dotted sky with our keypads and memories, our imaginations and hopes for tomorrow. Our collective stories are out there in the universe, and they become part of her constellation, her vision for the future, born out of the imagination of a little brown girl who dreamed up new worlds. And so this book really gets into the fact that, I mean, as the book says, Octavia became the first Black woman science fiction author whose writing continues to inspire readers of all backgrounds. And at one point she said, I'm a 48-year-old writer who can remember being a 10-year-old writer and who expects someday to be an 80-year-old writer. I'm also comfortably asocial, a hermit in the middle of Los Angeles, a pessimist if I'm not careful, a feminist, a black, a former Baptist, an oil and water combination of ambition, laziness, insecurity, certainty, and drive. And so something that Octavia Butler is credited with pioneering is the idea of Afrofuturism, the idea that, okay, Black people are a part of history and they're a part of the future too. The past and the present certainly inform what's going to happen next. But, I mean, writers have this sense of, okay, well, we have to be able to imagine what comes next. Like, that's one of the purposes of writing, is to try and figure out what could come next. Like, what might the future look like? It can be the worst case scenario, it can be the best case scenario. Usually, I mean, most stories about the future are a bit of both, and they're somewhere in between. So if you're interested in science fiction, or you don't maybe know a lot about Octavia Butler, again, I came into this knowing the basics of her and wanting to read more of her work, and this is definitely continued, like, made me think, oh yeah, I definitely want to explore more of this person's work. And again, both of these books are available physical copies through the library. So I know this one, I don't think I need to order a copy, but if you want to order them, you can always go to the online catalog and do that. And then when they arrive, you can check them out. And thank you for watching. I will see you again next week.